Hi everyone, it's me. Welcome to today's video. We're doing a little bit of a chat today. Today we are going to talk about some books that I was wrong about. I feel like normally I tend to have a good idea of books that I will love and books that I will not love so much because I just feel like that comes normally. After you've read so many books, you've really built up your book taste, you generally know like what to steer towards and what to steer far away from. But in the instances of these books that we're going to talk about today, I can admit I was wrong. So we're going to talk about books on both sides of the spectrum. We are first going to talk about the books I thought I would love, but I ended up not loving so much. And then we're going to move over to talk about the books that I thought I wouldn't love so much, but ended up really, really loving. So yeah, we're going to chit chat, grab a snack, get comfy. Let's get straight into it. Okay, so the first book I thought I would absolutely love, but kind of fell short of my expectations, are Infinite Faiths by Laura Steven. I'm actually still a little bit sad about this one. I didn't end up hating it. I still ended up enjoying a lot of parts to this book, but my problem with it is it didn't expand into everything I wanted it to expand to. I honestly think this book could have done with more pages, more words. If you don't know what this book is about, it is a fantasy romance, I would call it. It is a standalone and it follows two souls that are cursed to find each other in every one of their lifetimes, fall in love with each other in all of these lifetimes, and also kill each other in every single lifetime. So definitely not a good curse to be in. And we follow these souls through multiple reincarnations as they meet, go through their whole process. And our protagonist soul, she is currently in a life that she actually does not want to leave. She does not want to go through the same cycle because she currently has a sister she wants to stay alive to take care of. And so that's basically our story. We go through so many reincarnations in this book, but I think that was one of the problems with this book is that we went through so many different lifetimes that the point came across. You know, it told us, yes, these souls have been intertwined for so many years, like thousands and thousands of years, and they keep going through the same cycle over and over again. They're probably so sick and tired of it. But I think because this book was so short, let me get the page count for you quickly. It's like 340 pages long. I just feel like for the amount of reincarnations we went through, we did not spend nearly enough time in some of them. And they were actually, like, while I was reading this book, there were a few of these lives they were living that I was like, I just want to take a bit more of a beat in this life. I want to pause. I want to learn more about these two characters in particular. And I feel like this book would have been a lot stronger if we went through less reincarnations, but just spent more time in them. I also will say the ending of this book really threw me off. The tone really changed, and you know, the kind of twist reveal at the end of the book wasn't what I was expecting at all, but kind of not in a good way. I feel like twists can be good when you read the twist and, you know, maybe it was unexpected, you wouldn't have thought of it, but once you know the twist, you're like, oh, you know what, that makes so much sense. How did I not guess that? In this twist though, it just kind of came out of the blue. It sort of felt like the book moved into a different genre when the twist happened. So the entire mood changed, the writing changed, and so I was just disappointed by the ending. The writing in this was absolutely beautiful though. It's very descriptive, flowery writing, and I do tend to like that style of writing. So I think this book had a lot of potential. It just didn't meet all of my expectations for it. And honestly, it may have been unfair of me to have such high expectations for this book because it is a debut. I will still be very interested in reading whatever Laura Steven comes out with next. I think she's actually releasing a new fantasy under the name of L.K. Steven. I haven't picked that up, but I've seen some other people read it and I've heard good things about her next book. So yeah, I'm still curious to continue reading her because I do love her writing, but there were just a few things about this book that did not 100% deliver for me. Okay, the next book that I was wrong about was A Fate Inked in Blood. I really, really wanted to love this so much. This is essentially a Viking romantasy, which is a subgenre of romantasy that I have not really read. So I don't know, I really wanted to love this. I wanted to read something in this genre that also tied in Norse mythology, and it just seemed like a really good time. I think also I don't pick up too much romantasy anymore these days. I do tend to prefer either more fantasy books like fantasy romances or just romances, or I know I've been getting into like literary contemporary fiction a lot more recently, but at the time I picked up this book, I was really heavily reading a lot of romantasy books, so I was in that phase in my life. So I thought I would really, really love this. Unfortunately, and I have talked about this book a few times on my channel in the past, I just think the pacing of this book was really weird, and it resulted in me not really caring what happened to any of the characters. I think the first chapter of this book actually was very strong for me. It made me very curious. It was one of those first chapters that tugs at your heartstrings immediately, like it kind of pulls you in to relate to the main protagonist, and I really felt for her in the beginning of the book. But then after that, I guess like some of the choices she was making, and then also the speed of the romance development, actually not even romance development, I would say this book was one of those lust first, romance second books. I just don't like that sort of an arc in a romance, so I couldn't care about our two main characters, and I think this book dove into really heavy battle scenes way too quickly. I think we just needed more time to develop our characters, to have a bit of dialogue between them, to get like a little bit more context about the two of them together as, you know, our main couple that we're supposed to be rooting for, before throwing them into all of these high stakes battles. But yeah, honestly, I read this a little while ago, so a lot of the details are fuzzy in my head, but I do remember being highly disappointed about this one. The next one we're going to talk about takes a slightly different tone. This is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. This is actually a middle grade fantasy book, and I normally don't pick up middle grade fantasy books these days because obviously I am past the prime of reading middle grade. I do know a lot of people my age who still love reading middle grade, and there's nothing wrong with that, but just for me personally, I do not love a middle grade book. I will enjoy a YA still. I think that still gives me like fun, fuzzy nostalgia feelings, but in terms of middle grade, it just bores me. But I did pick this up because I had watched the movie Howl's Moving Castle, and I did love it, but I wanted more answers out of the movie. I think I loved the vibe of the movie. I loved the aesthetics. I loved like the characters, but there were just so many things that were left unanswered in the plot, and I picked up the book wanting to know those answers. And because I loved the movie, I thought I would love the book, but unfortunately, I did not love the book. First of all, this book was not what I expected at all because it did not really follow the same story as the movie at all. The initial setup of like the characters that are around was similar, but in terms of where the story went, I would say the overall plot was literally completely different. A totally complete story compared to the movie. So I definitely did not get those answers that I was looking for, that I was missing from the movie. But this is another book I just couldn't get myself to care about. I think if I read this when I was younger, I would have devoured it. I did actually really love Diana Wynne Jones as an author when I was a kid. I remember being so obsessed with her Chrestomancy series, but somehow I skipped over this one. I missed this one as a kid, and so I think I was just past the age that I should have been, you know, when I read this. And I also think the vibes of the book are very different compared to the vibes of the movie. They're both whimsical, but in different ways. I think the movie had more of like a mystery whimsy, and the book had more of just like a childish, fun whimsy, which makes sense. It is a book for children. But yeah, I don't know, all kinds of unexpected things with this one. And then the two last books I'm going to talk about for this first category before we move into the more positive side of things are books that I've read more recently. So you may recall that I read 28 Summers by Elin Hilderbrand last month? Yeah, I think it was last month. Elin Hilderbrand is an author that I feel like I consistently enjoy. Some of her books have been 5 stars for me, some of her books have been 4 or even 3 stars for me, but even if not all of her books are like, you know, perfect 5-star reads, I have generally like always enjoyed her books, at least. Like they've always left me with a positive feeling until this one. So this is one of Ellen's Nantucket novels, and I think what's interesting with her books is that you never really know what you're gonna get yourself into. The only thing you do know is that they will be set on Nantucket, but she kind of genre hops between her books, and I think all of her books are technically classified under either general fiction or women's fiction, but I do find her books, like all of them almost, have a very different tone. Some of her books seem true general fiction, some of them seem kind of magical realism, some of them fall under a more mystery vibe, and some of them are more romancy, and I would say this one is definitely more on the romance side. So we follow Mallory in this one, who at the beginning of the book is struggling dealing with cancer. She is on bed rest. She's kind of living out her last days when she passes her son, who's taking care of her. She passes him a note with mysterious instructions to call a number. So her son calls the number. The person who answers ends up being Jake McLeod, who's a very high profile guy who is currently married to the woman who is running for president. And so we get into this whole, like, how do they know each other? Why did my mom tell me to call him? And we jump back in time to follow this romance that spans over 28 summers, where our two main characters have like a one-day affair, like a once-a-year affair, every single year for 28 years. Now, this book is clearly, from the synopsis, very heavy on the cheating trope, okay? And I can read books with cheating in them, obviously, like that's just, you know, something that happens in life, so obviously it's going to appear in certain stories. But what I can't do is root for characters that just consistently cheat over and over and over again. Like, that is the main theme of their romance. I think I would have honestly enjoyed this book more if it was one of those books where, like, you're not supposed to root for the two of them. Like, it's more of a drama fiction versus a romance fiction. But because it really felt like this story was really justifying the cheating and making it seem like, oh, but like we're doing it because like our partners aren't treating us properly, so like we actually really love each other and like we deserve to see each other one time a year. It felt really like, I don't know, Elin Hilderbrand was trying to justify like the cheating was a good thing in this book, and I couldn't get into that messaging. I really disliked it. So yeah, this is actually the first Elin Hilderbrand book that I have ever disliked, like rated under a 3-star. I was wrong about this one, thought I would love it, but didn't. Okay, and this one will come as no surprise to you because it is another one that I've read recently, but oh, this one hurts so much. Firefly Leigh by Kristin Hannah. This one still hurts me, the fact that I didn't love this book, because Kristin Hannah, you guys know, is one of my favorite authors. She just has a way of words. She has a way of storytelling. I typically really love her stories, and I typically also really love her characters, which is why I was very surprised at this one. Firefly Leigh follows two women. Well, they start off as kids and then they grow up. But we follow Kate and Tully as they become friends in childhood, unlikely friends, one would say. And then you just see them as they grow up through the decades. I think this book spans 3 decades? I think so, 3 or 4, somewhere around there. But you know, we follow them from childhood to adulthood and just see how their friendship changes over time, how they treat each other over time, and how they themselves as individuals also evolve over time, which, you know, is a story that I feel like I read the synopsis and I'm like, yes, I am absolutely gonna love this book. I'm gonna eat this book up. It's, to me, is, you know, seems like it would be a perfect balance of nostalgia plus learning about interesting characters plus just seeing like female friendship dynamics. Like, I love reading about female friendships, right? Who doesn't? But I did not love reading about this female friendship in particular. I think both of them were very toxic for each other. They were not actually well-suited friends, and I can see, you know, we love a good underdog story. We want to root for friends that are unlikely friends, but somehow still fit together. I just don't think the two of them actually fit together. I think they were just very wrong for each other, and the way they evolved, this book could have been good if they evolved and like learned how to be friends that were so different, but I don't think they ever actually learned. It was just like clashing. Constant clashing over decades on different like friendship styles, like friendship preference styles, love languages, you could say. They just did not work together. And while they were both wrong for each other, I think there was one character in particular, Tully, that was the more toxic friend in this dynamic. And similar to 28 Summers, I just could not root for the two of them. I did not want their friendship to succeed. I honestly maybe would have preferred this book if they just split ways, like kind of accepted, hey, you know what? I will love you forever. I'm so glad we shared the memories that we did, but maybe we just need to part ways for our own health. But that was not the overall point of this story. So yeah, I was really disappointed in this one. I will say the writing was still lovely. It still had that Kristin Hannah writing that I love. Her writing, I feel like, it's a good mix between being ambient and just kind of like blunt and straightforward, but the story was not it for me. I will say this book has been adapted into a Netflix show. You can see there's a Netflix circle on my copy of the book, which is so unfortunate. And I have heard better things about the show. I think from what I've heard, they really changed Tully's character in the show. So maybe even the showrunners like read the book and they were like, you know what, let's make Tully a little more likable for the show, for like to appeal to a wider audience. So I am curious to see like kind of the differences they made to her character in the show and to see if I would like it better. But in terms of the book, did not love, unfortunately. Okay, we're gonna move over to the more positive side of this video where we talk about books I thought I would not enjoy so much, but I actually did. So moving more into the more optimistic half now. Our first book is actually Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. This was one of those books I honestly picked up because I was just curious as to what everyone else was reading. I think all of us as readers feel this sometimes. I do, for the most part, try to pick up books to read that I think I have a high chance of liking. You know, I am not really the type of person to really pick up a book knowing that I'll hate it and just hate read a book. I do genuinely want to like all the books that I read. But in this case, it was definitely more of a curiosity thing because the only Sally Rooney I had read prior to this was actually Normal People, and I didn't love it. I think there's something about Sally Rooney's writing that you either love or you really don't love. My main thing with her writing is honestly lack of quotation marks. I don't know if it's like a cultural thing, but Sally Rooney does not use quotation marks for dialogue, and it drives me mad because I never know what is being said out loud versus thought in someone's head. And then even if I do know it's been said out loud, I don't know who it came from. Like normally you can piece it together due to, you know, context clues, but there have been some moments where I've been like, who said that? Like if you have 5 characters in a room and someone says something and there's like a no quotation marks dialogue quote, you're like, it could have been 3 out of the 5 of them or something like that. So I find her writing style very frustrating to read, but I picked this one up because I was curious, and as a nice pleasant surprise, I actually did enjoy this one. It was frustrating to read. I did still experience that while reading this, but for some reason this one really clicked for me. In this book we follow 2 brothers, very drastically different. They're not very close. They're like a little bit estranged in a way, but at the beginning of the book their father passes away, and so they both have to deal with this grief, and we see how the 2 of them deal with it separately in their own ways, but at the same time we have a few scenes obviously where they have to come together, and there's so much like weird friction, like familial friction between them. And I found it really interesting to read because we do dive back and forth between their POVs and you get so deep into their heads. The way Sally Rooney writes is very state of consciousness, just like mind rambling. And one brother I found very frustrating to read because his brain was more of like, I don't know, it was very chaotic and he did not think in full sentences. And so a lot of this book was also, you know, on top of the lack of quotation marks, we also didn't get full sentences for half of this book. And that really frustrated me for honestly the majority of this book. But by the end of it, I don't know what happened. Maybe it was because I had to focus so deeply on it because the writing language was not intuitive for me. So I really had to like make sure my brain was locked in every time I picked this book up. But by the end of it, I was so engaged, and I don't know when it clicked. Like at what moment I was like into the book, but I was. And by the end of it, I needed to see how things unfolded. The tension was so high at the end of this book, and I needed to know where everyone ended up at the end. So surprisingly, I did really end up loving this book. It wasn't perfect for me. It wasn't a 5-star, but I gave it like a 4 or something, I think. So frustrating, but ended up loving it. Okay, we're gonna talk about this next one super quickly because I have also talked about this one quite a bit on this channel recently, but Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo is definitely one that just surprised me. I went into this book and series overall with such low expectations because everyone in the world kept telling me Six of Crows is Leigh Bardugo's best book. That's like, you just have to read that duology. Don't even bother going to Shadow and Bone because it's just not as good. It's not worth it. So I picked this trilogy up because I wanted more context on the Grishaverse. I enjoyed Six of Crows, but I was like, I feel like I'm still missing a piece of this world. But I had low expectations for the story because of how everyone else was talking to me about this series. And guys, I ended up loving this trilogy even more than I loved the Six of Crows duology, which I know is like one of the most unpopular opinions out there, but I loved it. Yes, this trilogy did feel so YA, but it's a YA series. You know, what are you gonna expect? Of course it's gonna feel YA, that's kind of the point. But I genuinely loved it so much. I feel like the world felt so much more rich in this one because you actually get world building. You actually are able to take the time to learn about the magic, the lore, the history of it, where everything came from. And now, after reading this trilogy, I have so much more of a respect for Six of Crows, now knowing the backstory of everything. And just like the story in itself in this trilogy is so wonderful on its own. I do know like the route it takes is maybe not the route that popular fantasy books these days take, so I can see why some people get maybe disappointed by, in particular, the romance route in this trilogy. But I loved it. I loved it. I loved the themes. I loved the world. I love all of the characters in this Grishaverse. But Shadow and Bone, loved it. Definitely recommend read it before Six of Crows. I will say that over and over and over again until the whole world knows. Okay, we're gonna talk about The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley. Now, this was probably the first sci-fi book I had picked up since Ready Player One, which is something I read when it came out. When did that come out? Like 15 years ago? 10 years ago? I don't know. But I typically do not pick up sci-fi. But I was really curious about this one, mostly because Haley Pham read it and she really, really loved it and it got me so curious. But this is a time travel sci-fi. And interestingly enough, like as the reader following the protagonist in this book, we actually did not do a lot of time traveling in this book, but it was a book just kind of about the concept of time travel and the impacts it can have on someone's personality, like on someone's own persona, and also the impacts culturally. Because our protagonist that we follow, she at the beginning of the book gets a new job as, I forget what they're called, but she's basically a caretaker who has to babysit someone who they've brought back from time, because obviously this guy that they've brought back from time, he does not belong in this world. He's from like the 1800s, so there's so many things he doesn't understand, like the concept of a toilet, how to use that, how to turn on a TV, how to do your dishes, like certain words we're not supposed to say that are rude, and you know, stuff like that. She just has to train him on how to be a person of this time versus a person of 1845. And so that's what we dive into with this one. I went into this with low expectations just because it was a genre that I do not read so much, but I genuinely loved this book so much. It ended up being one of my top reads of last year. I think just the concepts this book explores was really interesting to me. I learned a lot while reading this one, and I can see why some people wouldn't like this book because there are parts of it that make you feel a little uncomfy. And I think that's kind of the point of the book, but this one was a nice surprise, The Ministry of Time. If you still have not picked this book up, I would definitely recommend it. And since I read this one last year, I have picked up 2 other sci-fi so far, and I'm planning on picking up a 3rd. So it's kind of introducing me back into this genre and also reminding me of the fact that I love time travel books. This one I've also talked about quite a bit recently, but Ready or Not by Cara Bastone really shocked me. First of all, it is hard for me to fall in love with a romance author. I tend to read romances as little breaks, as little palate cleanser type of books. There's something in my brain that is always convinced that I will not love a romance book. It'll just be kind of for fun, because it is hard for me to find a romance author that I love. And so Cara Bastone being a new romance author to me, I didn't want to have too high expectations going in. And also, this book is a giant walking pregnancy trope, and that is just something I never thought I would be interested in reading. Like, yes, maybe in a general fiction book, but I didn't ever think I would love a romance that revolved around a pregnancy, and this book was so pregnancy. The book itself is literally divided into trimesters. Like, if you open the book at the very beginning, you get Part 1, it says, first trimester, how to master the art of stealth panicking. And the book is literally divided into first trimester, second trimester, and third trimester. So lots of pregnancy talk in this book. The premise of it is that our main character gets pregnant from a one-night stand at the beginning of the book, and then so she has to navigate her pregnancy. And obviously there's a little romance story in there. And I truly believe that any story can be interesting as long as the author tells it well, which is why I think these days I'm trying not to pick up books based on just tropes or what it's about, because recently I have discovered a lot of books that I typically wouldn't pick up, but because it was written so well, I still love the story. And that's something I've discovered this year with my reading journey. So I don't know, this was just a breath of fresh air. I also did really love the male protagonist in this book. Very golden retriever vibes, and just someone who would be genuinely a great person in real life and not just in fiction. I really loved this one, ready or not. All right, we have one more book to talk about that surprised me. And this one is definitely very different from Ready or Not that we just talked about. Phantasma by Kaylie Smith. This is a gothic romantasy that is basically a Caraval but adult and spicy. And I was excited to read this book for those Caraval vibes. Like, I really love like a games book, like a trial book, something that's a little mysterious, a little bit whimsical. And so I was excited for that aspect of this book, but I obviously was not very excited about the spice portion of this book, because if you know me by now, you know I don't love reading spice, and typically I do try and stay away from books that, you know, I hear have a lot of spice in them, because generally I don't love them. But this book made me realize that I could just skip spice chapters. Because a lot of the time, the spice doesn't really have much to do with the plot. And so this book made me realize that not all spicy books are off limits to me. I can still read a spicy book. I don't necessarily have to love the spice, but if the plot is still good, like if there is still a good backbone to the story and the book is just not all spice, I can still read it. I can still enjoy it. I just don't have to read every single spice detail. And it also taught me that I can skim or skip certain parts if I don't like them. And I'm never one to like actually skim a book. When I read. Like, what is the point of skimming a book? But in terms of excessive spice scenes, I have learned that I can skim them and it's fine. And I was very pleasantly surprised, very happy at how much I enjoyed this book, how creative the plot was, and how I allowed myself to not let the spice get in the way of my enjoyment of this book. So I really loved this. I actually also really loved Enchantra, the sequel. I loved it even more than Phantasma, but I think this kind of opened my horizons. There are definitely some books that I would never normally gravitate towards, like never think of reaching, that I'm now thinking about reaching. Things like, oh gosh, what is that author's name? The author of Nocticadia, Carrie Lake. I've heard some good things about, books like Nocticadia or Anathema, I think it's called. Stuff in that genre that has this sort of gothic, dark, fantasy, romantasy element, but I normally would have been like, I'm staying far away from that because I don't like vulgar spice. I'm now kind of like curious and thinking maybe I can expand my horizons and branch out and read some of those types of books as well. Who knows? Maybe I'll love them, maybe I'll hate them, maybe they'll end up being in part 2 of books I was wrong about. But in general, I do honestly love a book that proves me wrong. Sometimes it's moments like this that can really shape and change your reading journey. That being said, I am going to leave you guys here for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave me a like and a comment. If you don't know what to comment down below, tell me what is a book that you've read recently that has surprised you. If you like me, subscribe, do that bell thing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!